Okay, good afternoon again. This is Virginia Gaglianone with La Opinion newspaper, and I'm here to discuss Proposition 62 and 66. Next to me, to my right, is Mike Farrell. Everybody probably knows him already. Doesn't need introduction. And Alex Simpson from the California Innocence Project Issues. This is going to be a little different format because the people who oppose Proposition 62 couldn't make it. So we are going to read a little statement from them. All right.
Thanks, Virginia. I'm reading a statement on behalf of the No on Prop 62 campaign. Does not represent C Political's point of view. This represents No on 62. Join us in voting no on Proposition 62. Let's be clear what Proposition 62 does. Proposition 62 says the worst of the worst murderers to get to stay alive at the taxpayer's expense decades after committing their horrible crimes and mocking the pain of their victims' families. The death penalty is reserved for only the worst murderers like child killers, rape, torture, murderers, serial murderers, and cop killers. Just 1% to 2% of about 2,000 murders in California annually end up with a death sentence. Proposition 62 says these most heinous crimes should have no higher level of punishment. We disagree. For the worst criminals, there needs to be a death penalty. We all know California death penalty system is broken. Death row inmates are now able to file one frivolous appeal after another, denying justice. The answer is to amend, not end, California's death penalty laws. Prosecutors, law enforcement, and the families of murder victims oppose Proposition 62 because it jeopardizes public safety, denies justice and closure to victims' families, and rewards the most horrible killers. The backers of Prop 62 want you to believe they are protecting wrongly convicted death row prisoners from being executed, but in a meeting with the San Francisco Chronicle, Governor Jerry Brown said who was a former attorney general, said there is no innocent inmates on California's death row. The backers of Prop 62 say it will save taxpayers money. Who are they fooling? Under Prop 62, taxpayers are on the hook to feed, clothe, house, guard, and provide health care to brutal killers until they die of old age, even giving them a heart transplant. That's why if Prop 62 doesn't protect victims and doesn't protect taxpayers, who does Prop 62 protect? Who else does Prop 62 protect? Richard Allen Davis, who kidnapped, raped, and tortured a 12-year-old Polly Klaas. Serial killer Robert Rhodes, who kidnapped, raped, and tortured an 8-year-old Michael Lyons before stabbing him 70 times, and hundreds more like them. California's death row inmates include the killers of over 1,000 murder victims, 226 children, 43 peace officers, 294 victims who were raped or tortured before being killed. Don't be fooled. Join us to vote no on Prop 62 and yes on Prop 66. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Nate. And now I'm going to give an opportunity to each of you to do a 1-minute introduction about the proposition.
Sure. Thank you. What, you want to go first, Jen?
No, go ahead.
Okay. What we know about the death penalty is that it is racist in application. It's only used against the poor and the poorly defended. It entraps and kills the innocent along with the guilty, and it is hideously expensive. Proposition 62, very simply, replaces the death penalty with life in prison without the possibility of parole. It requires those people then sentenced to life without parole to work, and which they cannot do on death row, and requires that 60% of the money they earn is paid into a victim's restitution fund. And it saves, according to the legislative analyst, $150 million every year.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of the California Innocence Project, and I've been asked to talk mainly about yes on 62, ending the death penalty, but I can also talk about the no on 66 campaign as well. And my perspective is, I think, fairly simple to understand, that we know that there are innocent people on death row for crimes they didn't commit. Nationwide, we have 156, I think 157 now, people who've been exonerated through DNA or other means who are on death row, who were sentenced to death, and who were later found to be innocent of the crimes that they were committed. So there are some nationwide statistics that show around 4% is the estimate of people who, 4% of the people on death row are innocent. California has a huge death row population, which means there's probably about 40 people on death row in California for crimes they didn't commit. And just to clarify the statement from the other campaign, the interesting thing about Governor Brown's statement is that he didn't say that there were no innocent inmates on death row. What he actually said was there's no evidence of innocent inmates on death row. And the reason for that is very simple. We don't investigate cases after the person's been executed. We don't know whether or not we actually have killed innocent people. We know statistically it's very likely. But if we haven't done it, it's because the process that we have takes a very long period of time, which gives us, people like the Innocence Project, time to investigate those cases and discover that the people are innocent. So if we haven't done it, it's because the process, we have time to investigate the process post-conviction. So that's why I am yes on 62 and why I'm no on 66 as well.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to say a little thing. Proposition 62, probably already everybody know, but just in case, proposed abolish the death penalty, while the Proposition 66 proposed to change it. They say it's just exactly what he was saying. It takes too long for the executions. So when in California you have two propositions that they contradict each other, the one that with more votes is the one that is going to prevail from both of them. It's going to be two different, but we are putting them in the same bag, basically.
Well, it's
kind of.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And what will happen if they both pass is there will be lawsuits. The answer that you always get from a lawyer is, what's going to happen? It depends. And what is going to definitely happen is that there are going to be years of lawsuits about whether or not one trumps over the other. An interesting wrinkle of the 66 campaign is that there is some language in there that says if they get more votes, then they're the one that's going to, then 66 is going to be the law of the land. 62 actually doesn't have that language in that. So what does that mean? So if both pass, then that means there's going to be lawsuits. To resolve whatever the issue is. But obviously, if there is both of those passing, then we're going to have some severe problems about what we really want to do with the death penalty in California. If you're concerned about actual innocence, if you're concerned about killing people for crimes they didn't commit, if you're concerned about some of the racial disparities of the death penalty, like Mike was talking about, then Proposition 66, speeding up the death penalty, doesn't do anything to resolve that, doesn't do anything to solve those issues, and in fact, increases the likelihood that we're going to execute somebody for a crime they didn't commit. The only way you can resolve those issues is to make sure that you don't have a death penalty. And that's the only way to make sure that somebody who is actually innocent isn't killed for something they didn't do.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, Mike?
If I can just add to that. District Attorney Lacey said that we want to do away with the death penalty. Therein taking away the highest form of punishment. What I would suggest to you is the highest form of punishment is life in prison without the possibility of parole. The death penalty lowers the entire community to the level of the perpetrator of a crime, which we deem unreliable and inappropriate. The issue of Governor Brown's statement is something that I think we all ought to take into consideration, as was pointed out. There were two, Governor Brown, first of all, couldn't have said in good conscience, thank you very much, in good conscience that there is no guilty person on death row when the vast majority of them have not fully had their appeals legislated, examined. And in fact, there are two people I know of by the name of one by the name of Ralph Thompson, and the other Ralph Thomas, and Dennis Lawler, both of whom were charged, convicted, and sentenced to death, and died on death row before their appeals were resolved. And when the appeals were resolved, it turned out they were innocent. What we also know, as was pointed out earlier, is the case of Thomas Thompson, a man who was executed in our state, may well have been, many people believe, has been an innocent, was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. And third, of the 18 that are today have fully resolved their appeals and are ready for the executioner should anyone be ready for the executioner in the event the executioner gets to do his or her job again. One of them, who has insisted on his innocence for the 32 years he's been on death row, just had his lawyers present evidence to the governor that corroborates his claim of innocence. So we have a lot of work to do, as was suggested. Many of these cases have not been reinvestigated or fully investigated, and we are in a position where this system, the district attorney would have you believe, is fail-safe, is foolproof. They simply are so dogged in their pursuit of the guilty that they simply don't make mistakes. Well, the Harvard Law Review, the Harvard College and the Houston Institute just recently did a study from their Fair Punishment Project. Fair Punishment Project looked at California's outlier counties. There's outlier counties in the United States that are counties that have killed more than 8 people in the last 5 years. California has 5 of the 16 outlier counties in the country. And in those outlier counties, in that period of time, 2005 to 2010, 94% of the defendants sentenced to death in Los Angeles County were people of color. In Orange County, 89% of the defendants sentenced to death were people of color. In Riverside County, 75% of the defendants sentenced to death were people of color. Rather than the worst of the worst, it appears to me that what we're sentencing to death are the blackest of the black and the brownest of the brown.
Thank you, Mike. I don't know if you want to talk. You would like to talk about when Nate read the statement about the cost of keeping, people for life in prison against death penalty.
I'd be happy to, and it's an interesting. I'd say the best thing about the Proposition 66 campaign is it's got a very great name. It makes it sound as though what it's trying to do is really save a lot of money for the state of California. It's actually completely untrue. In fact, the way that it'll actually happen is if Proposition 66 passes and we have the death penalty speed up here in California, part of the way that it'll try to do that is by shifting all of these death cases to the counties of conviction for ultimate review of the case, which means that instead of the state of California paying money for death penalty appeals, for investigation of a death penalty case, then Los Angeles County, you the taxpayer and the person who's sitting in Los Angeles County trying to get justice in your own case will have to pay those costs. So what'll happen is that if you're a victim of a crime, but it's not a death penalty case, then most likely your case is not gonna get heard for another 3, 4, 5 years, because all of those death cases need to be heard within a set period of time, and it'll crowd out the other cases that you can see in Los Angeles County. So it's going to cost a lot of money because all those cases in Los Angeles County have to be heard within a set period of time, and it'll crowd everything else out. The death penalty is a complicated system, and it's just like any system that we have. If you want it to be fast and you want it to be cheap, then you're going to have to sacrifice accuracy. If you want it to be accurate and you want it to be fast, it's going to cost a lot of money. And if you're building a house or repairing a car, or if you're trying to sentence somebody to death, it's always about that triangle. You want it done fast and cheap, it's probably not going to be very good. If you want it done accurately and you want it done fast, it's going to cost a lot of money. So that's what we're trying to talk about when we talk about the death penalty. The only way you get rid of that triangle, by the way, is to end the death penalty and make sure that you don't sentence people to death for crimes, and especially don't sentence people to death for crimes they didn't commit.
All right, thank you. Do you want to add something to that?
Yes. The problem with Proposition 66, in my view, is that it's dishonest. The prosecutors who have put it together know that they cannot do what they claim they will do. They know they cannot tell the Supreme Court of the state of California that they must resolve every death penalty appeal within 5 years. They simply can't do it. Today, it's 12 years. And they want to add a level of appeal to this process and then say they will have to do it within 5 years. It's simply not possible. And they can't tell the California Supreme Court how much time they can take to determine whether or not an appeal has value. So that's number one. Number two is they also want to assign attorneys, require attorneys who are on the list accepted by the state of people who can do appeals. They break into two pieces. One, people who will do death appeals, and two, people who will not. They simply want to erase that division and allow people who are not trained to do death appeals to be assigned to do a death appeal. That's a terribly complex area of law, and what they're requiring people who are untrained to do it without providing any money to train them is going to simply add to the level of reprocess that they go through when it gets to the United States federal court system, where they send them back in many instances because of ineffective assistance of counsel.
All right, thank you, Mike. I don't know if you guys want to talk about the work portion. You know that the convicts will be able to work and provide 60%. I read that 60% of the work in prison will be for the victim.
That's correct.
Yes.
The provision in law that Proposition 66 provides is that all people on life without parole, which will be the almost 750 men and women who are now on our death penalty, plus the ones that are already on life without parole, it will be adding that nearly 750 men and women, and require that they work and that they pay 60% of the money they earn to a restitution fund for the family members of victims of the crimes that they are purported, at least, to have committed.
All right, thank you. I don't know if we all it's a different format, but if I would like to give each of you an opportunity to do a closing statement. Mm-hmm. We don't have anyone to oppose anything you say, so each one can. I don't know if you would like to start with the closing statement, or Mike.
Sure, whatever.
Would you?
I'm happy to do the closing statement first. Mike is a much more eloquent speaker than I am, so I'll give him the floor to the end. Really what we're talking about is what are the concerns that you have about the death penalty. If you're concerned about issues like innocence, executing somebody, and I talk about executing, and really what we're not, it's really kind of a misnomer. It kind of sanitizes it quite a bit. What we're really talking about is killing somebody for something that they didn't do. If that's a concern of yours about the death penalty, that you think, maybe we shouldn't do that, then Proposition 62, I can never keep these straight. And this is the concern, obviously, that none of the people who are in the voting booth are going to be able to keep these straight. If you want to be concerned about killing innocent people, then vote to end the death penalty. If you're concerned about the way that the death penalty applies in a racially disparate way, that African Americans are overrepresented on death row, for example, if that's a concern of yours, then you should vote to end the death penalty. Because the alternative is that you vote to speed up the death penalty, and those concerns that you have about executing innocent people, about executing people who are the people who are kind of the most vulnerable, the most socioeconomically underrepresented, the poorest people in the society. If you're concerned about the way that the death penalty is applied, then the likelihood that you're going to execute somebody who didn't do something, the likelihood that you're going to execute somebody who the worst thing that happened to them is that they grew up in a socioeconomically impoverished neighborhood, you're going to increase the problems with the death penalty. That's what we're really talking about. If those are your concerns, then you should vote to end the death penalty. If they're not your concerns, then you vote to speed up the death penalty.
All right, thank you, Alex. Mike?
I mentioned the Fair Punishment Project's report. Another thing that we haven't had the opportunity to mention, they said in San Bernardino County, for example, 50% of the defendants sentenced to death had an intellectual debility, a severe mental illness, or brain damage. Human Rights Watch, an organization I've worked with for many years, says that the largest mental containment facility, not a mental institution, but the largest mental containment facility for people with mental illness in the United States today are our prisons, and particularly our death rows. We have to see to it that we as people recognize that the death penalty system is run by human beings who are fallible, and it is therefore capable, and I would promise you, full of the unfortunate fact that it makes mistakes. What we as the citizens of California and the leading state in the nation, forgive me, can do by ending this system, by ending the death row that contains almost 750 men and women, the largest in the United States, the largest in the Western Hemisphere, one that contains 25% of our national death row population. If we end that by the vote of the people, it will say to not only the people of this state that we don't believe in taking the life of human beings, particularly when they are possibly innocent human beings and they are inappropriately sentenced because of their race or their social position, but